Modern poetry sucks. For the most part, I mean, most modern slash Instagram poetry I see consists of consists of something that looks like this. I was meat and he was vegan. I'm sorry, but I've had this thought since seeing the Estivia post from 3 years ago about basic modern girl Instagram poetry. I mean, putting 5 words on a page and calling it poetry is quite a stretch. Almost every single piece of poetry I see online has the same format and shape. I've had my fair share of modern poetry to intake, and it's almost all the same thing in the same format with different words. There's no new ideas. Everything's the same format. Not really teaching or instilling anything in me when I read it. The rhythm is almost the same and sometimes even non existent. I was a book and he couldn't read, blah, 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 blah. Most modern poetry is just people complaining about how their ex boyfriend or ex girlfriend dumped them and left them or did them dirty. Or in the better side, it talks about society problems and political justice. And like Davia said, it really isn't poetry, but it's just statement and sentences. I mean, I could say that in a daily conversation and it would not sound strange or weird. Almost the sentences like are really vague and obvious, and I'm not saying poetry has to be completely ununderstandable. A lot of these books include feminist messages, which is great. Poetry has always had a philosophical side to it that talks about political justice. On the other side, a pretty large book with a few words on each page is just a waste of paper. I mean, can we even call it poetry anymore? 5 words, maybe 1 to 2 sentences, some nice cute font, and we're done. I'm not saying it had to be something deep or you have to sound like Atticus. I'm not saying that. I'm not a great poet either. I'm surely cannot compare myself to Khalil Gibran or any of these great poets. And I'm not saying all over simplistic poems are horrible. But in my opinion, poetry should preach and instill to us. And this isn't entirely Ruby Kaur or Amanda Lovelace's fault. In fact, I like to blame early 2010 Tumblr poetry for setting this Tumblr, Instagram, blended poetry shabam. I mean, a good pro about this is that I guess poetry is now more accessible. And I feel like a lot of the reason why this style gets hit isn't even because of the actual poetry. But to be honest, I feel like y'all just want to gatekeep poetry and make it say like, oh, you cannot put this much sentences, or you can't use this much amount of words, or you have to have this specific flow. And you just be like people. A lot of older poetry fans are like trying to gatekeep poetry and what is and isn't allowed to be poetry, and then a bunch of girls on Tumblr kind of just take that away from them. My personal dislike, my personal disdain and dislike from this style comes from, like I said, the lack of like rhythm. It's not lyrical and it's more of a statement and just lack of creativity. And I'm not saying all free write poetry is generally just bad because of that. I have seen some really amazing free write poetry, and it's not all of that. But I'm just saying that it's just such a waste of pay, and like it's just really a waste, to be honest. Like anytime I get these poetry books, specifically the I'll just say, just so I don't get like in trouble with anything, I'll say water and sugar book. It was just a waste of paper. It has like, you know, like it's just such a waste of paper. It has become, I mean, the meaning is just technically just a bunch of deep quotes, and that is not poetry. And to be honest, these type of poetry is what really got me to poetry in the first place. So when I branched out and I branched out and I seen more poetry, and I even got inspired to write my own poetry. But I like to thank this style for, I guess, breaking barriers in the poetry world. But overall, after reading more and more poetry, I have begun to realize that this poetry style kind of sucks and it's overrated and oversaturated. So I do still have respect for this style, yeah. But to be honest, I just think that there could be a lot more potential that I could see. And I feel like oversimplistic poetry needs to kind of take a break for now. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. A quick disclaimer, I just want to say that my next video will be about what I consider good poetry and what I believe makes poetry good. So I guess the video is now officially over, so bye.